What you are about to hear will leave you speechless, and it happened right here in small-town America, where secrets run deeper than anyone could. Imagine Maria had been married to David for 23 years, and in all that time he had never once seen her remove the delicate silver necklace that rested against her collarbone. Every morning when she woke up there, it was gleaming softly in the early sunlight, and every night, when she went to bed, it remained clasped around her neck like a guardian, protecting something precious. David had asked about it countless times over the years, but Maria would always change the subject or give him vague answers about it being a family heirloom from her grandmother in Mexico. But on this particular Tuesday evening, everything was about to change in ways that would shatter David's world completely. They were getting ready for bed after another ordinary day when David noticed Maria struggling with the clasp of her necklace as she stood in front of their bedroom mirror. Her fingers were shaking, and she seemed frustrated, almost desperate, as she fumbled with the tiny mechanism. Honey, let me help you with that, David offered, stepping closer to his wife of more than 2 decades. But Maria's reaction was immediate and shocking. Don't touch my necklace, she cried out, her voice filled with a panic that David had never heard before. Her hand flew to her throat, protectively covering the necklace, as if her life depended on keeping it safe from his touch. David stopped in his tracks, completely stunned by her reaction. In 23 years of marriage, he had seen Maria happy, sad, angry, and everything in between, but he had never seen her look so terrified over something so simple. Maria, I was just trying to help, David said gently, his voice soft and confused. What's wrong? Why can't I touch your necklace? But Maria just shook her head violently, her eyes wide with something that looked like pure terror. Please, David, just leave it alone, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Some things are better left untouched. But David couldn't let it go, the fear in his wife's eyes, the desperation in her voice, the way she was protecting that necklace, like it contained the secrets of the universe. Something was very wrong, and after 23 years of marriage, he deserved to know what it was. Maria sat down heavily on the edge of their bed, her shoulders shaking as quiet sobs began to escape her lips. The necklace caught the light from their bedside lamp, and for the first time David noticed that what he had always assumed was just a decorative pendant actually looked like it might open it. Was a locket? How had he never realized this before? How had he lived with this woman for over 2 decades and never noticed that the necklace she never removed was actually a locket that could contain photographs or keepsakes? The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. Whatever was inside that locket was the reason Maria never took it off. Whatever was inside that locket was the reason she had just reacted with such terror when he offered to help her. Whatever was inside that locket was a secret she had been keeping from him for their entire marriage. David knelt down in front of his wife, taking her trembling hands in his own. Maria, he said, his voice gentle but firm, we've been married for 23 years. We've shared everything together. We've been through births and deaths and everything in between. What could possibly be in that locket that you can't share with me? Maria looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and for a moment, David thought she was going to tell him. Her lips parted as if she was about to speak, but then she shook her head again. You don't understand, David, she whispered. Some secrets are kept to protect the people we love. Some secrets are kept because the truth would destroy everything we've built together. But David had reached his breaking point. 23 years of wondering about that necklace. 3 years of accepting vague answers and deflected questions. 23 years of respecting her privacy about something that clearly held enormous significance in her life. He couldn't take it anymore. Before Maria could react, David reached out and gently but firmly took hold of the locket. Maria gasped and tried to pull away, but David held on. Please don't, she begged, her voice breaking. Please, David, you don't know what you're doing. But David's fingers had already found the tiny catch that held the locket closed. With a soft click, the locket sprang open in his palm, and what he saw inside changed everything. The first thing he noticed was how old the photograph was. The edges were yellowed with age, and the image had that slightly faded quality of pictures taken decades ago. But the face in the photograph was crystal clear. It was a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with dark curly hair and the most beautiful smile David had ever seen. The child was sitting on what looked like a wooden porch, wearing overalls and a striped shirt. His little hands were clasped together in his lap, and his eyes were bright with the kind of innocent joy that only young children possess. But it wasn't just any little boy. Even though the photograph was old and the child was young, David recognized those eyes immediately. They were Maria's eyes. The same deep brown color, the same gentle expression, the same warmth that had made him fall in love with her all those years ago. This was Maria's child. Maria had a child. David's hands began to shake as the full weight of what he was seeing hit him. His wife of 23 years, had a child that she had never told him about, a child whose photograph she had been carrying next to her heart every single day of their marriage, a child who would now be a grown adult somewhere in the world. Child who David had never known existed. He looked up at Maria, who was watching him with an expression of pure anguish. Her face was pale and her eyes were filled with a pain so deep that David could feel it radiating from her. She knew that her secret was finally out. She knew that their lives would never be the same. David's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. Who is this, Maria? Who is this little boy? Maria closed her eyes as if she couldn't bear to look at him. His name is Miguel, she said, her voice so quiet that David had to strain to hear her. He's my son. The words hit David like a physical blow. Your son. He repeated the words, feeling foreign and impossible on his tongue. Maria, you have a son, but where is he? Where has he been for the past 23 years? Why didn't you tell me? Maria opened her eyes and David saw a lifetime of pain and regret reflected in them. Because I gave him up, she whispered. Because I was 17 years old and pregnant and alone, and I thought I was doing the right thing, because I thought he would have a better life with a family who could give him everything I couldn't. Bess, I was a child myself, and I made the hardest decision of my life. David felt like the room was spinning around him. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, everything he thought he understood about their life together, was crumbling beneath his feet. You gave him up for adoption, he said, trying to make sense of what she was telling him. But Maria, this photograph looks like it was taken when he was 3 or 4 years old. If you gave him up as a baby, how do you have this picture? Maria's sob broke something inside David's chest. Because I didn't give him up right away, she said. Because I kept him for 4 years and tried to raise him myself. Because I loved him so much that I convinced myself we could make it work, even though I was barely surviving. Because every day was a struggle, and every night I went to bed wondering if I was failing him. Because when he was 4 years old, he got sick, really sick, and I couldn't afford to take him to the doctor. Because I had to choose between paying rent and buying his medicine. Because one day I looked at him, pale and thin, and I realized that my love wasn't enough. Because I realized that keeping him was selfish, when there were families out there who could give him the life he deserved. David's heart was breaking for the young woman. Maria had been 17 years old and facing an impossible situation, trying to raise a child on her own, with no support and no resource. The ultimate sacrifice, because she loved her son more than she loved herself. But there was still so much he didn't understand. Maria, he said gently, this was before we met. You were 17 and he was 4 when you gave him up. That would have been over 30 years. A gal's been married for 23 years. Why couldn't you tell me? Why did you keep this secret for our entire marriage? Maria looked down at the locket still open in David's palm. Because I was ashamed, she whispered. Because I thought you would think less of me if you knew I had given up my child. Because I thought you would leave me if you knew the truth about my past. Because when we met, I was still healing from the worst heartbreak of my life, and I didn't know how to talk about it. Because as time went on, it became harder and harder to find the right moment to tell you. Because I was afraid that if I told you about Miguel, you would want to try to find him, and I wasn't ready for that. Because I was afraid that he wouldn't want to see me. Because I was afraid that he would hate me for giving him up. Because I was afraid that you would hate me too. David set the locket down carefully on the bed and took Maria's face in his hands. Maria, he said, his voice firm but gentle, could never hate you. What you went through, what you had to do, that took incredible strength and courage. You were barely more than a child yourself, and you made an impossible decision out of love. But, sweetheart, we're a team. We're supposed to face things together. We're supposed to support each other through everything. Why didn't you trust me? With this, Maria leaned into his touch, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Because I was scared, she said. Because I've been carrying this pain for over 30 years and I didn't know how to share it. Because every day I wonder where he is and what he's doing and whether he's happy. Because every day I wonder if I made the right choice. Because every birthday and every Christmas and every milestone, I think about what he might be doing. Because I love him so much that it still takes my breath away, even though I haven't seen him in 26 years. Because I'm his mother, but I gave up the right to call myself that. David pulled Maria into his arms, holding her as she cried for the child she had lost and the secret she had carried for so long. He thought about all the times over the years when Maria had seemed sad or distant, and he had never known why. He thought about how she always got emotional around children, and how she had been so understanding when they had struggled with their own fertility issues. He thought about how she had thrown herself into volunteer work with children's charities, and how she always seemed to have a special connection with kids who needed extra love and support. It all made sense now. Everything about Maria, that had seemed like just part of her beautiful, compassionate nature, had actually been connected to this enormous loss that she had been carrying alone. They sat together on their bed, holding each other as the weight of Maria's secrets settled between them. Finally, David pulled back and looked at his wife's Maria. He said, "Do you want to try to find him?" Maria's eyes widened with surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean Miguel," David said gently. "Do you want to try to find your son, our son? Because if you're willing to share this with me, then he's part of my family." Maria stared at him in disbelief. "You would do that?" she whispered. "You would help me find him?" "Of course," David said, without hesitation. "Maria, we're Madua. Past is part of you, and I love all of you. This little boy grew up to be a man who is out there somewhere, living his life. Didn't you think it's time you found out what kind of life that I stand? You think it's time you stopped wondering and started knowing?" Maria picked up the locket and stared at the photograph of her son. "He would be 30 years old now," she said softly. "He probably has a life, and maybe a family of his own. He might not even know he was adopted. He might not want anything to do with me or David," said gently. "He might be wondering about you too. He might have questions about where he came from. He might want to know that his birth mother never stopped loving him. He might want to know that you think about him every single day. He might want to know that giving him up was the hardest thing you ever did. But you did it because you wanted him to have the best possible life." Over the next few hours, Maria told David everything. She told him about Miguel's father, a boy her own age, who had disappeared when she told him she was pregnant. She told him about her own parents who had thrown her out when they found out about the pregnancy. She told him about the years of struggle trying to make it on her own with a young child. She told him about the adoptive family she had chosen, a loving couple who had been trying to have children for years. She told him about the last day she spent with Miguel and how he had cried when she said goodbye. She told him about the photograph that the adoptive parents had sent her a few months later, along with a letter saying that Miguel was doing well, but asking her not to contact them again. She told him about the years of wondering and worrying and hoping that she had made the right choice. And David listened to every word, holding her hand and offering her the support and understanding that she had needed for over 30 years. 3 weeks later, they were sitting in the office of a private investigator named Sarah Chen, who specialized in reuniting families. Sarah had listened to their story with compassion and professionalism. She had explained the process of searching for adopted children and the legal and emotional complexities involved. She had been honest about the fact that not all searches end in reunion, and that they needed to be prepared for any outcome. But she had also given them hope. The adoption had taken place in Texas, where records were more accessible than in some states. The adoptive family's name had been Miller, which was common but not impossible to trace. And most importantly, Miguel would now be an adult who could make his own decisions about whether or not he wanted contact with his birth mother. Sarah started her search immediately. She began by tracking down the adoption records and confirming the details that Maria remembered. She found the Miller family, who had indeed adopted a 4-year-old boy named Miguel. In 1994, the adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Miller, had renamed him Michael, but had kept his middle name, which was Miguel. From there, Sarah was able to trace Michael Miguel Miller through school records, employment records, and public databases. What she found was remarkable. Had grown up to be a successful architect, living in Austin, Texas. He was married to a woman named Jennifer, and they had 2 young daughters. He had graduated from the University of Texas with honors, and had built a thriving practice designing sustainable housing. But most importantly, Sarah discovered that Michael had been searching for his birth mother for over 5 years. He had registered with adoption reunion websites, and had hired his own private investigator. He had been looking for Maria just as desperately as she had been wondering about him. When Sarah told them this news, Maria broke down completely. For 26 years, she had carried the fear that her son hated her. For 26 years, she had believed that he was better off without her. For 26 years, she had convinced herself that she had no right to intrude on his life. But he had been looking for her. He had been wanting to find her. He had been missing her. Sarah arranged for initial contact through letters. She would act as an intermediary to make sure both parties were comfortable and ready for communication. Maria spent days writing and rewriting her first letter to Miguel. She told him about the young, frightened girl she had been when she made the decision to place him for adoption. She told him about the love that had motivated that decision. She told him about the years of missing him and wondering about him. She told him about David and how much she wanted Miguel to be part of their family. She told him that not a day had passed without her thinking of him. She told him that she understood if he didn't want a relationship with her, but that she needed him to know how much she loved him. Miguel's response came just 3 days later. His letter was 6 pages long, filled with understanding, forgiveness, and love. He told her that he had always known he was adopted, and that his adoptive parents had been wonderful. He told her that he had never felt angry about her decision, but that he had always wondered about her. He told her that he had hoped she was happy, and that he had worried about whether giving him up had caused her pain. He told her that he wanted to meet her, and he told her that he wanted his daughters to know their grandmother. He told her that finding her felt like finding a missing piece of his soul. The reunion took place 6 weeks later at a restaurant in Austin. Maria was so nervous that David had to practically carry her inside. But the moment she saw Miguel, all 30 years old and tall and handsome, with those same brown eyes she had kissed goodbye when he was 4 years old, she knew that everything was going to be okay. He stood up when he saw her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other across the restaurant. Then Miguel smiled the same bright, beautiful smile from the photograph in Maria's locket, and opened his arms. Maria flew to him, and they held each other and cried, and laughed, and tried to make up for 26 years of separation in a single embrace. David watched from a few feet away, his own eyes filled with tears as he witnessed the reunion he had made possible by refusing to let his wife carry her secret. Alone, Miguel's wife Jennifer was there too, and she welcomed Maria with the warmth and kindness of someone who understood how precious this moment was. And Miguel's daughters, 5-year-old Sofia and 3-year-old Belina, looked at their newfound grandmother with curious eyes and shy smiles over dinner. They talked and laughed and shared stories, told them about his childhood with the Millers, who had been loving, devoted parents. He told them about his education and his career and his family. He told them about his years of searching and his hope of finding Maria. Maria told him about her life after the adoption. She told him about meeting David and their marriage and their struggles with infertility. She told him about her work with children's charities and how every child she helped reminded her of him. She told him about the locket and how she had carried his picture next to her heart for 26 years. David told Miguel about the night 3 months ago when he had finally opened that locket. He told him about Maria's fear and shame and how she had carried this secret for their entire marriage. He told him about the decision to search for him and how that decision had brought their family together. As the evening wound down, Miguel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Maria. Maria unwrapped it carefully and gasped when she saw what was inside. Was a photograph of Miguel on his wedding day standing with Jennifer and his adoptive parents, but he had written something on the back: "To my birth mother Maria, thank you for loving me enough to let me go, and for loving me enough to find me again. Love always, your son." Miguel. Maria pressed the photograph to her heart and looked around the table at this family that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Son, whom she had thought was lost forever, her daughter-in-law, who had welcomed her with open arms, her granddaughters, who were already calling her abuela, her husband, who had made it all possible by refusing to let her face her pain alone. Later, Miguel and his family came to visit for Thanksgiving. Maria had spent weeks making all of Miguel's favorite foods from when he was little. She had also learned to make Jennifer's grandmother's stuffing recipe and had bought presents for Sofia and Elena. The house was filled with laughter and chaos, and the kind of joy that Maria had never dared to imagine. They sat around the dinner table. David looked at his wife and saw a completeness in her that had never been there before. The shadow of sadness that had always lingered behind her eyes was gone. The secret that had weighed on her heart for 30 years had been transformed into the greatest blessing of their lives. Miguel had insisted that Maria wear her locket to dinner, but now, instead of carrying her secret alone, the locket held new pictures of Miguel's wedding, pictures of Sofia and Alano, pictures of their whole family together. The locket that had once been a symbol of loss and shame had become a symbol of love and reunion and second chances. After dinner, as they were cleaning up, Miguel pulled David aside. "Thank you," he said. "Simply thank you for loving my mother enough to help her heal. Thank you for making her feel safe enough to share her truth. You for bringing our family together." David shook his head. "Your mother is the strongest person I know," he said. "She carried her love for you for 26 years without letting it make her bitter. She made the hardest decision a mother can make because she wanted you to have the best life possible. I did was refuse to let her carry that burden alone." "Any more?" Miguel smiled. "You did more than that," he said. "You gave her permission to hope. You gave her permission to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story could have a happy ending after all, and you were right." As David watched Maria playing with her granddaughters later that evening, he reflected on how much their lives had changed since that night when he had opened the locket. He thought about the secrets we keep and the reasons we keep them. He thought about the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. He thought about the way family can be created and lost and found again in ways we never expect. But mostly, he thought about Maria and the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. from a 17-year-old girl facing an impossible choice to a young mother making the ultimate sacrifice, to a woman carrying her secret and her pain for decades, to a wife finally finding the courage to trust her husband with her truth, to a birth mother being reunited with the son she never stopped loving, to a grandmother holding her granddaughters and knowing that love really can conquer all. The Locket that had once held only memories now held promises of holidays spent together, promises of phone calls and visits and shared stories, promises that Sophia and Alina would grow up knowing their grandmother's love, promises that Miguel would never have to wonder about his birth mother's love again, promises that Maria would never have to carry her secret alone, and promises that sometimes when we have the courage to open our hearts and share our deepest truths, the most beautiful miracles can happen. 3 years later, Maria and David were at the hospital holding their newest grandchild. Miguel and Jennifer had just welcomed their third child, a son they had named David Miguel, in honor of both his grandfather and his uncle. As Maria looked down at the tiny baby in her arms, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the darkest period of her life, when she was forced to say goodbye to her first child, to this moment of pure joy holding her grandson surrounded by the family she had never dared to dream possible. The baby opened his eyes and looked up at her, and Maria saw, in those tiny features, an echo of the little boy she had loved and lost and found again. She thought about the locket around her neck, now filled with pictures of all her grandchildren. She thought about the secrets she had kept, and the healing that had come from finally letting them go. She thought about David, and his love that had made all of this possible, and she thought about Miguel, her son, who had grown into a man of such grace and forgiveness that he had welcomed her back into his life, without question. As she held baby David Miguel close to her heart, Maria whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances and unexpected miracles, for the power of love to bridge any gap, for family that comes to us in ways we never expect, and for the beautiful truth that sometimes the most precious things in our lives are the ones we thought we had lost forever. The locket around her neck caught the light from the hospital window, but Maria no longer needed it to remember. The love that had once been hidden away was now surrounding her, living and breathing and laughing and growing. A family that had been broken was now whole, and the secret that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead become the foundation for the greatest joy of their lives. Sometimes the things we're most afraid to share are the very things that have the power to set us free. Sometimes the secrets we think will push people away are actually the keys to bringing them closer. Sometimes the pain we've been carrying alone is meant to be shared, and sometimes when we find the courage to open the locket of our hearts, we discover that love really is the strongest force in the universe. Maria's story reminds us that we all carry secrets. We all have parts of our past that we think are too painful or too shameful to share. We all have moments when we made decisions that we're not sure were right. But Maria's story also reminds us that healing is possible, that love can overcome any obstacle, that families can be rebuilt even after they've been broken, and that sometimes the very thing we think will destroy us actually has the power to save. So, if you're carrying a secret tonight, if you're holding on to pain that you've never shared, if you're afraid that your truth might push away the people you love most, remember Maria and her locket. Remember that love is stronger than fear. Remember that the people who truly love us will stand by us through anything. And remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we finally find the courage to be completely honest about who we really are. The locket may have held Maria's secret for 30 years, but love set it free, and in the end, that's what love always does. It sets us free to be our truest selves, free to heal from our deepest wounds, free to build the families our hearts are calling for, ruined, free to discover that our stories, no matter how broken they might seem, always have the potential for the most beautiful endings. This story touched your heart. Please subscribe to see more inspiring tales of love, family, and second chances like this video. If you believe in the power of truth and forgiveness, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their story isn't over yet. Their secrets don't define them, and that love really can heal anything, because sometimes we all need to be reminded that the most precious things in life are worth fighting for, worth waiting for, and worth opening our hearts to receive.